Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Brownfields Learning Lab hosted by the New Jersey Highlands Council. My name is Sean Vroom, and I am the director of the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly go over some housekeeping items. I just want to let everybody know that you'll all be muted during the presentation. I'd ask that you'd submit questions that we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Please submit your questions to the Q&A pane and address them to all. You should find that Q&A pane at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And then what we'll do is at the end of the presentations, we'll go through those questions and address them. And I just wanted to let everybody know that the presentation will be made available on the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center's website after the Learning Lab is completed. So with that, I'm now going to turn the program over to Lisa Plevin, who is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Highlands Council. So with that, Lisa, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Sean. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Before I start, I want to acknowledge two other Highlands Council staff people that are with us. Mary Jude Haddock-Weiler, our planning manager, waving, and Carol Ann Dickton, our manager of communications, who can give us a quick wave. There we go. We're very pleased at the response to this event and look forward to sharing a lot of useful, productive information with all of you. Let me begin by thanking Colette and her entire team at the Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT. A few of us on the Highlands Council staff attended a similar Brownfields Learning Lab several months ago, and we thought it would be really great to be able to bring this information specifically to the Highlands region and the municipalities and counties in the region as well. So looking around at some of the attendees, I recognize a number of our municipal and county partners and planning professionals. It's great to see that we also have people from outside the Highlands region. And I know that you will get a lot of valuable information from this webinar as well. What I wanted to do was start by providing just a little bit of information, background on the Highlands. So I guess this is the next slide for us, right, Sean?
Correct.
Okay, good. So the Highlands region of New Jersey is in the northwest portion of the state. It stretches from the Delaware River in part of Warren and Hunterdon counties to the New York State border, across half of Sussex County, northern Passaic County, and includes a small piece of Bergen County. It is part of the larger federal Highlands region, which also includes Pennsylvania, New York, and Connecticut. Next slide, please. So the region is important to New Jersey for its open space and natural resources. However, most significantly, the Highlands region makes up only about 15% of New Jersey's land area, but is the source of drinking water for over 70% of our residents. So in 2004, the state legislature passed the New Jersey Highlands Water Protection and Planning Act, which established our agency, the Highlands Council, and directed the development of a regional master plan to guide protection of the Highlands region. Next slide, please. This regional planning approach is particularly relevant to our conversation today and something that often gets missed when people are talking about the New Jersey Highlands Act. In taking a regional approach, the law acknowledged that New Jersey is the most densely populated portion of the most densely populated state in the U.S. So the Highlands Act focused on land use overall and not just land preservation. In fact, the Highlands Act is very clear that development and redevelopment are not only permitted in the region, but should be encouraged in appropriate areas. Next slide, please. So to help achieve this, the Highlands Council works directly with municipalities and counties in the region, providing not only resource protection grants and guidance, but planning expertise and grants to support development and redevelopment efforts. I want to emphasize that as you listen to the great information from the Brownfields Assistance Center on redevelopment, keep in mind that if your municipality or county is in the Highlands region, our agency can likely provide you non-competitive grants with no required match for the planning, design, and/or engineering of your Brownfields efforts. There are a few different routes to learn more about these opportunities, and the best step is to call our office to talk. Next slide, please, Sean. So here's our contact information, and feel free to reach out at any point if you have some questions about how we can be of assistance. And once again, thank you for coming. I'm delighted to see such a diverse group of participants, and the NJIT team has put together a great agenda for you today, so I'm sure you will enjoy this session. And I'd like to turn it over now to you, Colette.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I am actually going to stop the video of me so it's not a distraction. So I'm going to turn that off. There we go. Sean, if you'd go to the next slide, thank you. So Lisa, thank you so much. And thanks to the Highlands Council for hosting today's Brownfields Learning Lab. I'm Colette Santasiri, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT. And joining me today in the program are Sean Broom, who you've heard already, the Director of the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT, as well as Ben Alter, who's a Senior Consultant at GZA, which is a consulting firm, and an affiliate member of our Assistance Center. So you'll be hearing both from Sean and Ben during the course of today's event. We're going to give you a presentation on a lot of different topics related to brownfields, and then we're going to have lots of time at the end to open it up to your questions and answers. So to your questions and our answers. So as Sean said, as we go along, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat. That will help us a lot as we filter through all of the questions and see if we can answer them in the best way possible. If for some reason we can't get to all of your questions, don't worry about it. We can contact you afterwards and get those answers to you. So if Sean, you'll go to the next slide, let's get started. I wanted to start with some definitions first, and two specific definitions of what a brownfield is. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, otherwise known as EPA, defines a brownfield as a property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. Similarly, New Jersey state law defines a brownfield as any former or current commercial or industrial site that is currently vacant or underutilized and on which there has been or there is suspected to have been a discharge of a contaminant. Next slide. So as you can see on this slide, brownfield sites include old mills and factories and other industrial properties, but keep in mind that many brownfields are vacant lots, as shown in one of these pictures. And so their past industrial commercial life might not be immediately evident. Next slide. Additionally, the closed gas stations and auto repair shops, former dry cleaners, and some other vacant commercial properties are also considered brownfields. Now, it's important to point out that not all contaminated sites are brownfields, and not all brownfields are contaminated. So for instance, an active gas station that experiences a leaking underground storage tank or some kind of spill would be contaminated, but it wouldn't be a brownfield site because it is an active, viable business. A property with a closed auto repair facility would be considered a brownfield because it is a former commercial site that is currently vacant, and because of its past use, there may be contamination. However, it's not necessarily contaminated. So we have to keep that in mind, what the definition of a brownfield is as we move forward. Next slide. So brownfields cause a lot of negative impacts to communities. They contribute to neighborhood deterioration, and the negative perception of a neighborhood. They can attract vandals, open dumping, or other illegal or unwanted activity. They can degrade soil, water, air quality, and potentially cause public health issues. They can lower property values, reduce employment opportunities, lead to a loss of tax revenue, and limit economic growth. Next slide. But brownfield sites have some advantages. Many are located along waterways and rail lines and in downtowns, giving them a locational advantage for redevelopment. And many already have existing infrastructure, such as utility and sewer lines. Next slide. And most of all, a brownfield holds the potential for being transformed into a community asset. While these industrial legacy and commercial sites plague our communities, the cleanup and the redevelopment of brownfield sites present us with opportunities. So looking through the lens of the triple bottom line, that is environment, economy, and equity, cleaning up and redeveloping brownfield sites touches on all three. Next slide. So when we clean up brownfield sites, we're improving the environment. Brownfields can also be redeveloped to deal with issues such as climate change, like persistent flooding, as we've experienced of late, by creating land uses that store floodwaters, such as rain gardens and multi-use fields and other forms of green stormwater infrastructure. Next slide. Redeveloping brownfield sites can improve a community's economic conditions by catalyzing economic development, creating jobs, increasing tax revenue, and diversifying the local tax base. Next slide. And redeveloping brownfield sites help to improve social equity in so many different ways, including by removing health and safety hazards, removing eyesores, improving community appearances, alleviating communities' fears and worries, and transforming these properties into community-needed land uses, such as housing and recreation, schools, healthcare facilities, and so much more. Next slide. So cleaned up and redeveloped brownfield sites are key ingredients to creating economically, environmentally, and socially equitable communities. Next slide. So the process of planning for, identifying, assessing, cleaning up, and redeveloping brownfield sites is what we at the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center refers to as the Brownfields Blueprint. These are the essential elements to transforming your brownfield sites, those former industrial and commercial properties, into community assets. We're going to talk about all of these topics: planning, community engagement, funding, assessment and cleanup, and redevelopment. Again, within the time allotted today, we can't go into great detail on all of these, but we wanted to touch upon some of the key elements to all of these steps. And again, later on in the program, I'll tell you about how we can provide you assistance as you go through this journey. So let me turn the program over to Sean Vroom. He's going to start our journey through this Brownfields Blueprint. Sean?
Great, thank you, Colette. So the first phase of work in this Brownfields Blueprint is the planning phase, and it's widely recognized that successful brownfield redevelopment projects are based on a foundation of sound planning practices. So there's a strong correlation between effective early on and continued planning with redevelopment success. So there's a number of activities that should be initiated in the planning phase that will play an important role throughout the redevelopment process. And I'll discuss the more common ones. There are, however, two that are extremely critical for success, and they include partnership and stakeholders and assessing where you're at. And the reason they are so critical is that they comprise the bedrock of a brownfields project, as all the other elements are supported by them and relate to them in some way. So the list that I have on this slide, isn't in any sequential order for time or importance, as many of these elements can occur concurrently. The first element of a brownfields redevelopment plan is identification of a project champion. A project champion is an individual with the time, the energy, and persistence to keep a project moving forward. They should be organized and have the passion to advocate and promote the project. The next element is community engagement, which is extremely important and many times overlooked or done poorly. So I won't go into any detail on this element here, as I'm going to discuss it in more detail in the next section. So I'll move on to having a project vision. You can't plan a trip if you don't know where you want to go. So developing a project vision early on as possible is extremely beneficial, as it can help direct many of the other project elements, such as identifying a developer, identifying and securing funding, and the level of remediation related to the ultimate end use. I should also mention that having a clear and informed vision is a direct result of having included the appropriate stakeholders and partners in the process, as well as in the implementation of a solid community engagement plan. Next is having a brownfields inventory. This element typically pertains to brownfield projects that focus on a target area, that would include, things such as a downtown, a waterfront, or a community gateway. Having a list of brownfield sites at the ready supports land assemblage for larger projects. It puts you in a good position to pursue funding, and it promotes a comprehensive redevelopment approach that meets the community's needs. Next is prioritization of identified brownfields. Once you identify your brownfield sites, you should prioritize them to identify those with the highest redevelopment potential, whether that be for economic redevelopment or open space, recreational space, or whatever reuse is in line with your community's vision and goals. Examples of prioritization criteria include site size, access to that site, zoning, environmental conditions, which would include contamination, flooding. Are there wetlands on the site? Are there abandoned structures on the site? You also would want to take a look at what a master plan or redevelopment plan and it's how it relates to a site, as well as existing infrastructure. So what this does is it gets you kind of the low-hanging fruit on how to approach your brownfield programs and sites. So, and that's important because what happens is that once it gets the ball rolling on a brownfields program, and success breeds success. Next up would be funding. And so what you want to do is start thinking about identifying sources, project and applicant eligibility. You want to think about anticipated costs, project tasks and elements, and what funding you have secured, as well as what you anticipate requiring to complete the project. And the last two on the list are partners and stakeholders, and assessing where you're at. And I'm going to talk about those in more detail because they are really critical to a successful project, especially early on in the process. So brownfields redevelopment is a team sport, and one of the first activities that should be initiated in the planning phase that will play an important role throughout the redevelopment process is the identification of stakeholders and development of supportive partnerships. The redevelopment of a brownfields generally requires more stakeholder participation than the typical real estate transaction, and that's due to a number of possible factors, including the complex history of the site, community concerns about public health impacts and safety, difficulty getting funding and financing, and competing visions for the site's redevelopment. In addition, the cost of redeveloping a contaminated property often goes well beyond available local resources, and therefore partnerships are critical for success. So why are partnerships important? Partnerships or partners bring resources and specialized knowledge. Partnerships foster communication and collaboration and build bridges between the relevant stakeholders. There are several typical partners involved in brownfields redevelopment. For instance, agencies of the federal government, such as US EPA, provide both funding assistance as well as expertise. State and environmental economic development agencies, such as the NJDEP and NJEDA, also bring important resources to the brownfield redevelopment projects. Real estate professionals can help communities better understand the realities of the real estate market and can suggest various incentives that would help make local brownfields redevelopment projects economically viable. A public-private partnership between a local government and real estate developer is an effective collaboration for brownfields redevelopment, especially in weak market areas. A partner may also be a university or a college. They can be a valuable partner in brownfields redevelopment. Professors, research, and graduate students may provide insight and expertise on brownfield-related topics. Some universities and colleges host design studios in which students work on real-world development projects. And an important resource housed at the New Jersey Institute of Technology is, of course, the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT, which provides free technical assistance to the public and nonprofit sectors. And Colette's going to talk a little bit more about the center later on in the presentation. So other typical partners might include bankers or lenders, a chamber of commerce or business owners, neighborhood associations and other community groups, nonprofits, environmental consultants, environmental justice organizations. But in some cases, you're going to need to go beyond the usual suspects for a project. So there are, other groups and organizations that can add value to your brownfields redevelopment team. They can offer unique and important resources. For instance, local artists and cultural institutions can be great partners in bringing attention to brownfield sites, in suggesting creative ways to engage the community, in envisioning the property's reuse, and in creatively marketing the sites. Some of the benefits of creating meaningful partnerships and collaborations include it helps with community engagement, it helps you access funding, it increases your ability to tackle complex brownfield issues, and creates avenues and future partnerships for redevelopment. So another planning task is assessing where you are at. So what do I mean by assessing where you're at? Many communities have a tendency to become what we call site-centric. That is, they focus on the brownfield property itself and its associated contamination challenges. But it's important that brownfield practitioners take a step back and first look at how that site fits within the context of the larger community. So what you need to do is assess what plans are out there, how they relate to your brownfield site. For instance, you want to look at the municipal master plan, as I mentioned earlier. What does the master plan say about that area of town in which your site is located? Are there any redevelopment plans for the area in which your site lies that relate to your site? Is your site within a vulnerable area, such as one that frequently floods? You want to look at the zoning for your site. What uses are permitted there? So, placing your brownfield site within the context of the larger community helps to inform the ultimate redevelopment vision for the site. It's also important to find out what actions have already been taken, such as has a brownfields inventory already been prepared for the county or your municipality, showing where all the brownfield sites are? Have there been investments in the areas surrounding the sites, such as infrastructure improvements, which could be roadway, rail, utilities, so on and so forth? And then what you want to do is focus on your brownfield site itself. Find out all that you can about that site. You want to find out who owns it. Is it privately or publicly owned? What are the current uses and conditions of the site? Has there already been an assessment conducted on the brownfield site that indicates contamination or not? If you don't own the site, do you have site access? So in order to assess a site, if you don't own that property owner has to grant you access to the site. So if you don't have access, you can't assess a site. And is there already developer interest in the site? Having all this information can really give you a good foundation and jumping off point. So why is it important to plan? It's about getting your ducks in a row and positioning to set and meet the goals of your brownfields redevelopment process. So taking the time to plan will help you garner community participation and support for the redevelopment. It'll help you write stronger grant applications when you are seeking funding because it helps funders see that what you have is a real project. It's not just an idea and that its nexus was from a solid planning process. It will strengthen the marketability of the site so developers will have a good picture of the overall project. It will show the town's commitment to potential developers and also help you attract the type of developers that you want, those interested in building projects desired by the community. And it will also provide continuity for the ultimate redevelopment of the site. Remember, elected officials come and go, but a solid vision and a solid plan can endure those changes. So the next phase, and this is where I said I would talk in more detail about community engagement. So engaging your community starts in the planning process and it should continue all the way through the redevelopment phase. So what I'm going to do today is quickly discuss the elements that comprise the process of engaging your community. So educating the community on brownfields, garnering their input as to community needs and how those needs may be met through the redevelopment of your site or sites, and soliciting their input regarding the ultimate redevelopment of the site or sites should all be part of the community engagement process. But there's no one-size-fits-all approach to engaging any one given community, as every community is different and every community's needs are different. So it's critical that you construct a thoughtful and thorough plan before you begin the engagement process. So to help develop the framework of your engagement plan, you should ask yourself the following questions. Who is the community? Remember that communities are diverse in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, social economics, mobility, and education attainment. Careful consideration in identifying who the community is needed. Another question is, why are you engaging the community? What's the purpose? What do you hope to achieve? Answer to these questions will help you determine the methods you select for engaging your community. Another question is, how will you engage that community? There are many different tools and techniques available. We suggest that you explore the variety and research how other communities have successfully used these methods, then select the methods appropriate for your community. When will you engage the community? It's recommended that you engage the community throughout the entire brownfields process, from planning through redevelopment, but through the process, you may have different reasons to engage the community and you may choose different methods to use at different times. And lastly, what will you do with the results of the engagement? How will you incorporate community feedback into the planning for redevelopment of your brownfield site or sites? Your community wants to be heard and feel that their input is valued. So, feedback to the community and following through are critical. Don't just go through the process to say that you did it. So before we move on to the next brownfields phase, I just want to leave you with one final thought concerning community engagement. Successful community engagement empowers citizens. They feel valued. It elevates community spirit. They get the feeling that they're all in this together. It strengthens social inclusion because you're reaching out to not only the people who usually get involved, but to others in the community whose voice is just as important. And it contributes to meaningful change. So it ensures that the ultimate redevelopment meets the needs and wants of the community. So the next phase of brownfields, of a brownfields project is funding. So planning for, assessing, cleaning up, and redeveloping your brownfield sites comes with a cost. And most county and municipal governments and nonprofits do not have the funds to cover all of those costs. So it's really important to know where to find funding, how to secure it, and how to apply it to your project. So brownfields projects are funded by multiple sources that may include grants, loans, as well as tax incentives, just to name a few. The key to successfully funding a brownfields project is the ability to bundle those multiple sources, which is commonly referred to as the funding stack. Creating this funding stack goes beyond simply identifying funding sources. It requires a project vision as well as solid planning to assure that those funding resources are brought to bear at the appropriate place and time. So what I mean by that is that brownfield projects they're somewhat linear in nature. You know, you develop a vision or a goal, and then you lay out the tasks you need to achieve that vision or goal. So in simple terms, you plan, assess, remediate, and redevelop your brownfield. The various funding resources that you have identified most likely will be applicable to only a certain phase or task along the way, only applicable to a certain element or elements of the project, and are available at certain times. So having a solid redevelopment plan is critical to applying funding resources. And keep in mind that if you have a developer on board, much of that funding associated with the redevelopment phase will be their responsibility, so you won't have to be concerned with identifying those sources, which lightens the lift for you. So what I've listed here are some of the more common brownfields funding sources. The first one I'm going to discuss includes EPA's MARC Brownfields grants. MARC stands for Multi-Purpose Assessment Revolving Loan Fund, or RLF, and Cleanup. These grants, as you might have guessed, cover assessment and cleanup activities. One grant, the multi-purpose grant, actually covers both. And only recently, assessment and multi-purpose grants cover planning activities such as brownfield inventories, community engagement, conducting market studies, which is great because many communities don't have the resources to do that brownfields planning work. Entities that are eligible for these grants include local, county, state, and tribal governments and nonprofits. The funding amounts range, depending on the grant type, from $200,000 up to $1 million. EPA solicits these grants annually, usually in the fall. It selects the winners the following spring, and then the applicant has access to the actual funds the following fall. So basically, it takes 1 year from application to accessing the funds. So as I mentioned earlier, you can see why planning and timing are extremely important to the redevelopment process. And I should also note that RLFs and multi-purpose grants are offered on alternative years. So multi-purpose on odd years and RLFs on even. EPA solicitation for this MARC grant process happened just a week ago. They released their new guidelines. Those applications are all due December 1st. So if you're thinking about applying, you need to start immediately. So that's basically the federal grants. Another funding source I want to talk about is NJDEP's Hazardous Discharge Site Remediation Fund, or more commonly known as HDSRF. HDSRF grants and loans are available to public entities, private entities, and nonprofit organizations. The program is a rolling application process. Applications are prioritized based on whether you are in an urban municipality. So if you're in a BDA or an urban planning area, you're going to have preference on that. That's basically substantiates your eligibility for it. Assessment costs with these grants are 100% covered. Remediation cost share is tied to the end use. So depending on whether it's going to be an open space or a commercial business dictates what the percentage of the cost share that you're going to have to meet for this grant. HDSRF only covers costs directly associated with assessment and remediation, so they don't have the flexibility of the EPA brownfield grants, so you can't do planning work essentially. But unlike the EPA grants, they are available to the private sector. So you can get up to $1 million in loans to businesses and individuals per calendar year, and up to $2 million in grants and loans to municipalities. I should go back a little bit, take a step back also with the EPA grants. I know I said that the range is $200,000 up to $1 million. That you'll see on the guidelines that assessment grants go up to $2 million. The reason I only put it down for $1 million is because that $2 million cap is for states and tribal entities. So I didn't think it was going to be applicable to anyone participating in the webinar, so that's why I capped it at $1 million. So moving along is the NJEDA's tax credit revolving loan programs. These are anticipated to be rolled out later in this year or early next year. I don't have any details on them other than they're going to be applicable to brownfields projects. We'll just have to wait and see what the funding amounts and eligibility requirements will be for those programs. Lastly, I want to mention that there are other funding sources available, but they can be somewhat of a moving target And what I mean by that is their availability from year to year, and what project elements they can specifically be applied to can vary. The U.S., let's see here. USDA and USDOT and USEDA all have funding programs that can be applied to certain elements of a brownfields project, but you have to know what those project elements are going to be so that you can determine eligibility. So for example, if you have a brownfield that you are redeveloping and one of the elements is preservation of a pedestrian bridge located on that site, USDOT may have funding sources available through its grant programs that could be applied to either the rehabilitation of the structure or remediation work for the area the bridge lies within. So the big takeaway here is that in order to identify and secure applicable funding sources to build your funding stack, you need to do a good job with your project planning and tie it all together. So here you can see the EPA brownfield grants that are available. I'll go into these in a little bit more detail. You can see the assessment grants. Basically, you can do phase 1 and phase 2s, community engagement and market study type work. There's 3 kinds of grants under this year. Site specific is for $200,000. You can apply for a waiver that takes you up to $350,000. Community-wide assessment grants have now been increased this year up to $500,000. It was $300,000 the last go around, but being as they eliminated the coalition assessment grants, which aren't offered this year, they have increased the community-wide up to $500,000. And then, like I mentioned before, it's probably not going to be applicable to anybody participating today, but they have a new assessment grant that is for state and tribal community-wide grants that are $2 million, capped at $2 million. Your revolving loan fund grant, you can get $1 million for that. That is funding for cleanup activities, and you do so. The grantee basically lends or subgrants out the monies to applicants, and those are designed to operate over many years, and they can be refunded so that they can be lifelong. Cleanup grants, you can get up to $500,000 for a cleanup grant. It, of course, covers cleanup activities. There's a 20% cost share with the cleanup grant. You must own the site that you're going to apply for. Next up is multi-purpose grants. You can get a maximum of $800,000 for a multi-purpose grant. Those are not offered this year because this is a odd even year, so that means the RLFs are offered. So just to quickly go through these, you have to do at least one phase 2. You have to do one cleanup with them. You have to have an overall plan for the revitalization of one or more brownfield sites if it doesn't already exist. And you can do community development activities, visioning, and market studies and things that are basically categorized as planning work with those grants. So again, I went through and told you what the solicitation cycle is. Like I said, they were released last week. They're due December 1st. So if you're interested, you need to move on those. The next up, again, I went through these 3 grants in some detail. The one I want to discuss a little bit more in detail is the Highlands Council Environmental and Economic Sustainability Grant Awards Program. The grants are eligible to municipalities and counties in the Highlands region that have submitted a duly adopted notice of intent to petition Highlands Council in accordance with the council's plan conformance guidelines. Grant funding is awarded for planning initiative projects that further assist and or implement a goal, policy, and or objective of the Highlands. These funds cannot be applied to capital projects, so planning initiatives only. Funding is on a reimbursement base. Applications are subject to review by the Highlands Council Plan Conformance Committee and may require an authorizing resolution by the Highlands Council at a regularly scheduled monthly meeting before an award is issued. The maximum award for these is $50,000 and is on an open-ended grant program with limited funding. Applications will be reviewed as they are received, and qualifying projects will be awarded grants pending availability of funds. So again, as Lisa said, if you're interested in this grant, contact the Highlands Council. I put up the contact information on this slide. If you're interested, reach out to them. They'll give you all the details. They'll work with you to see what it can specifically apply to as far as your project. So I did go through all of these other federal funding sources earlier on. Again, they're kind of a moving target, so you need to have a good plan to understand and understanding of what your project components are and elements to see where any of these grants offered under any of these entities would fit into your project. So just to give you an idea of the many resources that can be drawn upon to fund a project, I wanted to show you a detailed funding stack for a project that's located in Jersey City. It's Berry Lane Park. You can see from the example that they went well beyond their own acquired EPA Brownfields funding and tapped into other sources. Just to name a few, they used HUD monies, they used Green Acres monies, they used New Jersey State Assessment funds, they used county open space funds, they used funding from prior property owners, responsible parties, as well as county revolving loan funds. So you can see from the list here that they left no stone unturned in their pursuit of funding. Identifying sources does not happen overnight, and this particular funding stack took a few years to cobble together. I also want to mention that identifying applicable funding sources for your project is one of the many free services available to New Jersey municipalities and counties, as well as nonprofits that are pursuing brownfields cleanup and redevelopment. So with that, I will turn it back over to Colette.
Okay, next slide, please. Thanks, Sean. So that was a lot of information. And again, any questions you have, please jot them down in the Q&A. We're going to move to the next topic, and that's assessment and cleanup. And you heard Sean talk about assessment and cleanup a lot, but what does all that mean? So the redevelopment of a brownfield site, it's like any other real estate development with a bit of a twist, and that twist deals with the potential for contamination. Prior to redevelopment, the property must go through a process to determine if contamination exists, and if so, the appropriate way to deal with that contamination. These environmental investigations add time and expenses to the typical real estate development process, and you should be aware of what they are before you even start down this road. So I'm going to turn the program over to Ben Alter. He's going to provide an overview of the steps the property has to navigate in New Jersey to ensure that the site's ready for reuse, and why due diligence is so important. So let's go to the next slide, and Ben, take it away. Ben, you're muted.
Well, I'm not coming through now. Hopefully everybody could hear me and I'm coming through. Okay?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody for attending this morning. I want to thank the New Jersey Highlands Council for having us speak with you and your members. And I want to thank NJIT Assistance Center for asking me to speak at this seminar. Sean mentioned a couple of very interesting things, I thank you for sort of setting the stage for what I'll be talking about. I've been an environmental consultant for over 30 years, and I could honestly say that the brownfields cleanups I find are the most satisfying projects that I've worked on, and I'll tell you why. And Sean kind of touched on some of this. First of all, Sean called it a team sport. And that's very, very true. When I'm working on brownfields projects, I'm working with people from various different disciplines and various different viewpoints on the project. I'm working with the finance people, the architects, the other project engineers, the contractors, the municipal governments, the utility companies. So it has a lot of different pieces. It's not something that you want to just walk into uninitiated, because there are a lot of complications when you're dealing with so many different parties with different agendas that in most cases drive, but in some cases don't, and things need to be worked out. It's also, I like what Sean said about success breeding success, that I think of lots of properties, but when you clean up a brownfields property, it's sort of like a kernel for that particular area or that particular municipality, that what used to be kind of rot and neglect and misuse now becomes something attractive that will attract people, which will attract businesses, which will attract more people and attract more businesses. So I find those projects very satisfying, because it doesn't end when the remediation ends. It's remediation for the municipality is the beginning of the process, which I enjoy. I'm going to talk now about how the basic process works at the technical level. And I'm going to really give you the 10,000-foot view. Obviously, there's a lot to each of the steps that I'll be talking about. So if you have any specific questions, go ahead. You can ask them, but this is not intended in any way of being a training session. So the first part of the process is what's called due diligence. And due diligence is a legal term, which means that you're doing what you're expected to do, whatever that is, whatever the industry expectations are, to look into a problem. And in this particular case, it's environmental due diligence. So we're looking into the environmental situation of a property. The first step in the state of New Jersey is called the preliminary assessment. Now, many of you may have heard of something called a Phase 1 environmental site assessment. You may have heard of it called the ASTM Phase 1 or something like that. Most financial institutions are interested in finding out what your due diligence is through a Phase 1 environmental site assessment. Now, the difference between that and a preliminary assessment legally is that the Phase 1, as we generally call it, provides protection against federal liability. The preliminary assessment provides protection against state liability. So the two processes are, I'd say, about 90% similar. There are some differences, but 90% similar. But if you want to get protection from both federal and state, you're going to want to do both. And again, it's a significant overlap, so it's not like a doubling of costs. It's an incremental increase in cost because there's different reporting requirements. But for the most part, you probably want to go through both steps. The key to the preliminary assessment is identifying areas of concern. So one of the examples that Sean gave is a gas station. So if you can picture a gas station, obviously you have your underground storage tanks with the pipes that lead to the dispenser pumps. They carry gasoline. If they leak any of those three components, you have a problem. So that would be an area of concern. But you may also have at the gas station service bays where they're doing work on cars and they have chemicals in the service bays. You may have underground hydraulic lifts. You may have a heating oil tank heating up the service building. So even in this very simple example of a gas station where it's obvious where the big problem could be, there are other areas that could also become very significant problems. So you want to do your due diligence on the property. The way that the preliminary assessment works is you look at the area of concern and you have two decisions to make. No further investigation required, or further investigation required. If you find that there is a concern here, that either the paperwork doesn't satisfy you, that there's no reasonable chance of release, or something that you observe cues you into there's something wrong here, then you go into further investigation, which is called the site investigation here in New Jersey. The site investigation involves sampling. Just to use an analogy, you go to the doctor, you get your annual physical. They look under your tongue, they look in your ears. let's keep the blood sample out of the picture, but it's basically a non-intrusive, look. Site investigation, now we're going to go and look inside. The part that you don't want if you're going to the doctor is the part that's going to start costing you some real money potentially if you're going through a brownfields project. So you hire somebody, you hire an environmental consultant, that person collects samples. In New Jersey, by the way, you have to hire somebody who has a specific license called a licensed site remediation professional. We'll just put that to the side for now. But you have somebody who will say, okay, I'm going to collect media samples, soil, groundwater, maybe vapor, analyze them for certain sets of contaminants. And again, we come to a go or no-go situation. The samples don't show contamination, no further investigation required, or the samples show contamination, we have to move on. So let's take the situation where we have to move on. Now that we've established that there's contamination, we have to notify the state. We call the DEP hotline. They assign a case number to it. Now you're in a regulatory loop. Now you're in the regulatory sphere. You're in enforcement. Now your job is to delineate the extent of the contamination that you detected. So let's just take, for instance, I collected a soil sample 8 feet down. It came up contaminated. Now I have to go look to the left, to the right, or to use more scientific way, I have to go north, south, east, west, and determine how far that contamination goes. I also have to go down because everything on the earth is three-dimensional. So now if I had my contamination at 8 feet, I have to go down to 12 feet, 16 feet, 20 feet, or wherever it takes me until I stop finding the contamination. Maybe I've encountered groundwater at that point. Okay, now I have to go look at the groundwater and determine if the groundwater is contaminated. If I find contaminated groundwater, now I'm not only chasing the extent of contaminated soils, I'm also chasing the extent of contaminated groundwater. Let's say the contamination is a volatile organic compound, and now that contamination is near my building, or near the, even worse, the neighbor's building. Now I have to go do a vapor intrusion survey. I have to test the vapors to see if contaminated vapors are escaping into that building. If I have a building on my property and it's slated for redevelopment, this is, after all, brownfields redevelopment, maybe I don't have to do that inside that building. It's coming down anyway. Nobody's in there. Nobody's breathing in the fumes. But in general, as you can see, what started out as maybe one contaminated sample now is expanded to a larger area of soils, maybe into groundwater, now maybe into vapors, now maybe into somebody's building next door to see if they have vapors, to see if they have contaminated groundwater. So as you can see, the project could really expand. If you are in an old urban area where there are a lot of potential problem sites, you could really grow this project. It could really become a big problem. So just like Sean said, it's very important at the very beginning to determine your objectives, to determine what your funding is, to determine where the boundaries are, because that's going to determine how you pursue your remedial investigation should the project come to that stage. Once you've defined the extent of the contamination and you've defined which media are involved, soil, groundwater, vapor, maybe even surface water if you have a lake or a stream nearby, now you move into remediation phase. How are we going to clean this up? As Sean mentioned, at this stage, you may be going into a different pot of money. You may have a certain amount of funding for the investigation phase, which has gone on until now. Now, as you go into the remediation phase, you may be going into a different pot of money. You may be applying for new grants. Hey, we have $1 million, but now it turns out it's going to be 2 million. EDA, HDSRF, whoever, what can you do for me here? You get together with your project planners, and you say, okay, we need to clean this up. Or maybe what we're going to do is, instead of remediating the one city block, maybe we need to cut the project because of funding and say, okay, let's concentrate on a half of the city block. Let's get that cleaned up and worry about the next phase for the future, for the next funding round or whatever. But now what we're doing is we're going into the remedial action. So remedial actions come in basically two flavors. There's active remediation and there's passive remediation. So let's use our example again of the gas station. We have some contaminated soil down there. Well, if there's no groundwater problem and there's no vapor problem and it's just soil beneath the feet, maybe we could just pave it over and be done. That would fall into the category of a passive remediation. The problem with that for a brownfields project is maybe you want to build something there. So now you can't just leave it passively contaminated if you're going to sink a foundation there, because by definition, you're going to sink a foundation, you're going to dig up soils. Those soils are going to be contaminated. It may not be a solution. Or maybe you say, hey, the eastern part of this property has contaminated soils. The western part of the property doesn't. We were going to put the building on the eastern part of the property. Maybe we move the building to the western part of the property, leave the eastern part of the property paved, then I could save myself $1 million in digging up contaminated soils. So as you can see, the Brownfields project, the environmental is not just a linear step one to step two. You're working with the team and you're trying to find the optimum solution, which may end up being, well, we got to dig up $1 million worth of soils because we have to put the building there. There's no other choice. That could be the case, but there is a certain amount of working it out that goes on in this process. Once, of course, you have your remediation decided, then you actually do it. You bring the iron onto the property, and you dig, you install, you put in a groundwater treatment system, you put in a soil treatment system, you put in a vapor mitigation system, whatever it might be. You also may be thinking about putting in different things prophylactically into your new buildings. For instance, you have a vapor problem. Well, we're not going to worry about the vapors in the old building. That's coming down anyway. But when we go and construct a new building, we're going to put in, first of all, we're going to put in some kind of a vapor barrier along the foundation, bottom walls, so that vapors can come into the building. We're also going to put in a vapor mitigation system, which you'll see this is called a sub-slab depressurization system, SSDS. All that means is that you're going to run pipes underneath your building, suck the air out, vent it to the roof so that whatever vapors are accumulating under there, they don't get a chance to work their way into the building. They get diverted up to the roof and vented out into the atmosphere. It's very similar to a radon mitigation system, which most people are more familiar with. So you're now tweaking the design of the current building to accommodate the contamination that you found. It's way cheaper to put those systems. When I said prophylactically, you say, well, how do you know that the vapors are going to get into your building? Well, it's way cheaper, less expensive to put in these mitigation systems, a vapor barrier and an SSDS before you build the building than to retrofit an existing building. It's like 10 times more expensive or even more to retrofit an existing building. So you're going to put those in because it's much easier to do, much cheaper to do, and easier to do when you are first building a new building. So now you've built your building, you've done some remediation, and maybe you have some residual in the ground. Maybe you have to run that vapor mitigation system because you have vapors coming into the building, or you have a groundwater contamination that needs to be monitored. That goes into a long-term planning phase. And I call that the tail on the tadpole, because the tadpole itself Once you've gotten that remediation done and you're going into what's called long-term monitoring, you now can apply for regulatory closure. And this is where, again, the LSRP comes in, the licensed site remediation professional that I mentioned at the beginning. That licensed site remediation professional is retained at the very beginning of the project. That person is responsible for seeing the project through. And then at the end, when you get to the end result of the remedial action with that tail, but before the tail is even implemented, that licensed site remediation professional issues to the client, and I call it the client because that client may not be the municipality. You may have your own economic development association. You may have some private partnership, public-private partnership, or maybe there is a private entity that's undergoing, that's taking on the responsibility for us. Whoever that party is, whoever retained the LSRP, now gets a letter from the LSRP called the Response Action Outcome Letter, the RAO letter. That's the goal here. The goal is to get to the RAO letter. When the LSRP issues that RAO letter, that project, that spill is closed. It has the same power as when the state issues a no further action letter, an NFA letter. In 2009, the state offloaded a substantial percentage of the projects that are undergoing remediation in New Jersey to the responsibility of the LSRP. So I would say 80% of all projects that are all remediation projects are now under the aegis of an LSRP. The only major exclusions are home underground storage tanks and federal cleanup sites. Once that RAO letter is issued, you're done with the remediation. That's usually a big landmark for your financiers. They want to see that so that they could implement the next round of financing, which generally has to do with the construction of the building. And then you have the tail. Maybe you're monitoring the groundwater, the vapors, the soil, the cap that you put over the contaminated soil. That could go on indefinitely. If you have contaminated soil and that contaminated soil is not going to, the contaminants are not going to biodegrade, that could be there forever. And then when I say forever, I mean pretty much forever. I mean, long after you and I have walked the face of the earth. But the costs are small, and especially in comparison to the costs of the remediation, certainly in comparison to the cost of a brownfield redevelopment project, it's relatively minor, and it's something that just gets put into the funding formula and then managed once the RAO letter is issued. Just a quick word about the environmental consultant process. As you can see, it's pretty well prescribed how an LSRP goes about his or her business. You want to get an LSRP on this project. I also very much encourage you to get an LSRP on the project who knows the Brownfields process and has been through it. Because most LSRP projects kind of work in isolation, where you do your PA, your site investigation, and so on, and you don't typically have to worry too much about what else is going on. Different on a Brownfields project because you have all these other pieces. You have a lot of timing issues because of funding. You have a lot of concern from the architects. You have to work with the municipalities. So you really want to seek out an LSRP who's been through this before. You don't want to be the person, the project that person learns from. You want to get somebody who's been through it, who knows how it works, who's dealt with the various constituents, who's been through public meetings, who knows a little bit about how to deal with the public. And then hopefully you get through it and you have a successful project. So I thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you. Again, I thank New Jersey Highlands Council, and I'm available if you have any questions.
All right, thanks so much, Ben. Ben went into a lot of detail, but I don't want you to be scared. This is a process that every property has to go through, you know, that's potentially contaminated. There's different degrees of contamination. So the process could be very detailed. It could also be very quick, depending on that contamination. So, you know, the takeaway here is there is a process you have to follow, but it's done every day. There are brownfields that are being cleaned up and being redeveloped. It's something that's very doable. So don't let this process scare you. Sean, if you want to go to the next, okay, thank you. So I'm going to take just a few minutes to talk about the typical redevelopment scenarios of brownfields redevelopment. We're addressing this topic last in the brownfields redevelopment process, but in reality, the determination of what entity will be redeveloping that property sometimes occurs at the very beginning of the process. So keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about three typical redevelopment processes for brownfields or scenarios. The first scenario is the private sector-led redevelopment process, and this was alluded to earlier. Private development most often occurs when a brownfield property is in an area with favorable redevelopment potential, where there's a healthy market demand for redevelopment and where the developer anticipates making an acceptable return on his or her investment. So in this scenario, a developer is responsible for the entire redevelopment process. The developer secures the financing, completes all the environmental investigation and the cleanup if that's required, meets all of the applicable regulations, and handles all of the pre-construction and construction activities. The second scenario is the public sector-led redevelopment, brownfields redevelopment. Public sector development typically occurs when there's little private sector interest in a property because of market factors or when environmental conditions, parcel size, parcel configuration, or other factors limit potential development options. In this public sector-led redevelopment scenario, a local government, such as a municipality, takes responsibility for the entire process. The municipality would take ownership of the property by voluntary purchase, foreclosure, or eminent domain, would conduct the environmental investigations and cleanup activities, as Ben had just spoken about, and it would handle the development activities on the site. This scenario is typical when the intended land use is public, such as a park, school, municipal building, library, or in this scenario, after the environmental investigations and site cleanup are complete, the municipality may sell the site to a developer or other interested party. The third scenario is the public-private partnership. A public-private partnership, a brownfield redevelopment project, occurs when there's an agreement between at least one public sector entity, such as a municipality, and one private sector entity, such as a real estate development firm, to combine resources and efforts to accomplish a common redevelopment goal. So in public-private partnerships for brownfields redevelopment, typically the public entity provides some initial funding, often for environmental site assessments and possibly contamination cleanup, and maybe for infrastructure improvements to support the development. And then a private sector developer funds and manages the pre-development and construction phases. Public-private partnerships are often successful because initial public investments provide the necessary incentives for private sector development. So these collaborations reduce the financial burden on the public sector while accelerating the property cleanup and redevelopment. So I presented this redevelopment topic as the last one in the presentation, but in reality, it's very important for the vision for this ultimate development occur early in the planning stage. The ultimate end use of the site will impact the type of funding you can obtain, as Sean mentioned. And it's also going to impact the extent that you clean up a site and how you clean up that site, as Ben alluded to. Next slide. So we have given you a lot of information in a very short amount of time. And it's been a very high level overview. As you begin to tackle your brownfield sites, or even if you're already in the thick of things, you'll probably have a lot of questions and challenges that you're going to face. And so that's where the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT can help you. We at the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center view brownfield sites as opportunities. I've said this many times. It's an opportunity to transform your industrial and commercial properties into community assets. But we recognize that many local governments don't have the in-house knowledge or resources, including funding, to tackle challenges posed by brownfield sites. So that's why we created the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center, to be a free resource to New Jersey's counties and municipalities and nonprofits. And we thank the New Jersey Economic Development Authority because the grants that they have provided us allows us to provide this free assistance. So the mission of the Brownfields Assistance Center is to educate and engage communities around brownfield issues like we're doing today. It's to provide that free guidance and resources to county and municipal governments and nonprofits. And it's to develop tools and strategies and resources, create partnerships, and provide subject matter experts to brownfields challenged communities. Next slide, please. So we are located within the New Jersey Institute of Technology, but we're not an academic endeavor. We are a team of professionals. We're planners, engineers, environmental scientists, and social scientists. And we have collectively have experience helping hundreds of communities from across the country overcome their brownfield challenges. So we've been doing this for quite a while, many years, and we decided to focus a lot of our attention to helping New Jersey communities. Next slide. So here's how we can help you. And again, remember that our assistance is free if you're a county or a municipal government or a nonprofit. First, we have a resource center. We have a website that contains many different tools and resources and guidance and information. We encourage you to visit our website and to go back from time to time, because we are constantly adding new content to that website. We also post valuable information on our social media platforms. Next slide. A key feature of the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center is our Brownfields Help Desk. You can reach us by phone or by email. And here's where our personal assistance begins, and we tailor that assistance to your needs. So for instance, you might have a quick question. You heard something today, you wanted some clarification on that, or we mentioned the EPA brownfield grants that are coming out, and maybe you want to look at a successful application from last year or the year before. Give us a call, send us an email. We'll answer those quick questions. We'll get you the resource that you're looking for. So, so that's how we can help you quickly, but there's times when your assistant needs aren't as simple as those quick questions. And there are times maybe you don't even know what to ask for. You just know that you're facing challenges from these brownfields. Give us a call, send us an email. We'll sit down with you. We'll have a conversation about what the issues are, what your challenges are, and we'll get an understanding of what's going on. And then we can suggest different ways that we can provide assistance to you. It's not like we have, 5 ways that we can help you and hopefully, that'll fit your problem. It's not like that at all. We'll look into what the challenges you're facing are, and then suggest ways that we can help you. So the key takeaway here is, give us a call, send us an email. There's no application you have to fill out. You just reach out and contact us. So let me give you some examples of how we can provide you assistance. And again, these are just, 3 or 4 examples. There are many different ways we've assisted communities, but some things for you to think about. So, you might, in your community, you might have many different brownfield sites, and you just don't know which ones to focus on. And Sean mentioned this earlier in the planning phase about prioritizing your sites. We can develop a site prioritization process, and look at all of these brownfield sites and give you a ranked list of sites, suggesting the top 1, 2, 3 have the most potential for redevelopment, or for whatever you want those sites to be redeveloped as, based on criteria that we create. Another challenge you might be facing is, maybe you're having trouble getting the attention of developers. And that happens so often in many of our communities, where the real estate market maybe isn't as active as other communities. So we can give you some strategies on how to market your brownfield sites. Maybe you lack the funding to undertake the assessment and cleanup of the site. As Sean, talked about, there are many different funding sources. We can give you some guidance on those sources of funding, and walk you through how to look at those sources of funding and how you can build your funding stack. And maybe you're just new to brownfields and you just don't know where to start, and that is so understandable. So what we can do is we can sit down with you and create a roadmap, give you step-by-step instructions on, all the things you need to think about and to do to get these brownfield sites identified, assessed, cleaned up, and redeveloped. And then as you navigate those steps, we can help you along the way. So, those are just some examples of how we can provide you with assistance. I am going to turn the program back over to Sean, who's going to facilitate the Q&A. Here's our information. You can send us emails, individually, or just send the email to the Brownfield Center. Both Sean and I see those emails. And again, definitely go on our website. Sean, let me just mention that I know Ben has to leave a little early. So if there are questions that pertain to assessment and cleanup, let's get to those first. So Sean, take it away.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so this question is actually coming in just, yes, the slides will be made available. We're going to put them up on the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center website. It'll be under the resources tab, so you'll be able to download them from there if you wish. So let's go again. If you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A pane at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So the first question I have here is, and it is for Ben. Who does the LSRP submit the preliminary assessment to obtain the liability protection when no contaminated area of concerns are identified, or no new area of concerns identified that are being addressed by the current RP? So there is
Yes,
no new case, no new PI number.
right. The preliminary assessment does not need to be submitted to the state to provide the liability protection. You need to perform the preliminary assessment in accordance with the regulations, and that suffices to give you liability protection in New Jersey.
Okay. Next question is there a comparable agency to New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center in Pennsylvania? I do not believe there is one specific to the state of Pennsylvania, but there is a EPA-funded technical assistance provider that covers US EPA Region 3, and that is the West Virginia Brownfields Assistance Center. There are no more questions other than that. I'll give everybody a few minutes maybe to think about a question, and if you want to put it into the Q&A pane. Colette, go ahead. You were going to say something.
I was just going to say, I wanted to mention that the staff at the Brownfields Assistance Center can help provide technical assistance and guidance. There may be times where your request goes a little beyond our expertise. Maybe it's a legal question, or a question that consultants like Ben can answer. We have a partnership with the Brownfields Coalition of the Northeast, which is a great organization that is comprised of many professionals in many different areas of brownfields redevelopment, from attorneys to developers to consultants. And so if we get a question that for some reason, again, requires maybe an attorney to answer, or someone like Ben, it's a very technical question, we can send you to the Brownfields Coalition of the Northeast, and one of their volunteers will actually spend a little time with you. It's pro bono, and help you as best they can. So, keep that in mind too. A lot of times there's legal questions, and that's really beyond the scope of our technical assistance center. But we can connect you with some pro bono people who provide pro bono assistance. So keep that in mind. Any other questions?
There are no other questions that have come in. That was the one, only one.
I think we overwhelmed everyone with all of this information. But you're going to have questions. As soon as we log off, you're going to have questions, and that's okay. Our information is on the screen. Do not hesitate to send us an email with your questions.
And if you are thinking, I went through the funding, and I'll bring this up because it is the EPA's MARC grant solicitation is underway, and the due date is December 1st. If you do need assistance, if you need us, we can give you if you're going to apply and you have a grant put together and you'd like a free critique, we can certainly critique your grant application. If you're not sure what grant would be applicable to your project, we can provide you guidance with that. So anything related to the MARC solicitation, we can provide you with guidance on, get you to the right contact information at EPA if there's a question that they should be answering. We're going to be doing, we'll have all that information on hand. We're pretty fluent in the guidelines, even though they were just released a week ago. But being as that is underway, we can certainly provide you with assistance to get through that process.
One of the things that we can do, staying on the topic of EPA brownfield grants, we have a lot of successful past applications, and depending on what you're applying for, we can show you those applications, and you can see how others have put together their applications. These applications, the guidelines ask for a lot of information, and sometimes you just don't know where to get that information. There's health information they want. So, we can show you how others have addressed these requirements in their applications, and how successful, and obviously they were successful because they were awarded grants. So, that's another thing that we can do. If you're not sure where to get the information that you need to include in your grant applications, we can point you in the right direction there. There's many different ways that we can help you when it comes to EPA brownfield grant applications. Any other questions come in?
None have come in.
So one last thing that I would like to say, we don't want this to be a one and done kind of thing here. It was great spending some time with all of you this morning, but if there are other topics, brownfield related topics that you would like more information on, or have a webinar on a specific brownfields related topic, let us know. We design these programs for you. We want them to be as beneficial as possible, as helpful as possible to you. So if there are specific brownfields related topics that you think would help you along the way, whether we do that as a webinar or when we can, in-person workshops, we're happy to do that. Just let us know, reach out. And I think, Sean, at the end there's a survey.
Yes, you should receive a survey at the end of this. That'll, if you could please fill that out. It helps us. One of the questions is going to be, are there any topics that you think are important that we should be covering in these educational forums, please fill that out. Write down what that topic would be, and be happy to pursue and put that kind of educational forum out.
Okay, so with that, I guess I'll turn it back over to Lisa if you want to make some closing remarks. Thank you so much. We appreciate the time that you spent with us. And again, please do not hesitate to contact us. Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again, Colette, and your whole team. This was an excellent presentation, and I'm choosing to believe that there were no questions because you've covered every possible piece of information. So at any rate, just a quick thank you to everyone for attending. Again, remember, if you have any questions related to the support that the Highlands Council can provide as well, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to be of assistance. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.